He threw the resignation letter back across the desk without reading it. Not a glance, not a pause. Just two fingers, a flick of the wrist, and the envelope skidded off the edge and fell to the floor between them. "Pick it up," Damian Blackwood said, "and don't waste my time again." Charlotte Whitmore looked at the envelope on the floor. Then she looked at him. 3 years of 70-hour weeks. 3 years of missed birthdays, canceled plans, and a sister who had stopped calling because Charlotte was always, always unavailable. 3 years of being the invisible hand that kept a criminal empire from eating itself alive. She did not pick it up. "I quit," she said. "Effective Friday." If you've ever poured everything you had into someone who never once looked back to see if you were still standing, this story is for you. Stay until the end, because this one doesn't go where you think it will. And if it moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city or country. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's begin. Charlotte had not slept properly in 11 days. She knew the exact count because she had started keeping a tally in the Notes app on her phone, somewhere around day 4. The same night she sat in the back of a hired car at 2 in the morning, eating a gas station sandwich because she had forgotten to eat dinner, and there had been no lunch. The tally wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a cry for help. It was just something to look at when the exhaustion got so thick she couldn't tell anymore whether she was tired or simply disappearing. The resignation letter had taken her 6 drafts, not because she didn't know what she wanted to say, but because she kept second-guessing her own right to say it. That was the part that embarrassed her most later. 6 drafts, and half of them began with an apology. She deleted every apology, kept only the facts. Effective date, 2 weeks' notice. Her signature. She had walked into Damian Blackwood's office at 8:45 on a Tuesday morning, which was his first window of relative calm before the day swallowed him whole, and she had placed the envelope on the desk in front of him while he was reading something on his laptop. He hadn't looked up immediately. That was fine. She'd waited. When he finally looked up, he read the envelope, not the letter inside it. Just the word resignation typed on the front in clean block letters. And then he did what he did. 2 fingers. A flick. The envelope hit the floor. Charlotte was 31 years old, and she had been managing the operational infrastructure of the Blackwood organization since she was 28. She had coordinated wire transfers across 6 countries. She had managed communications between men who would not look each other in the eye. She had memorized the names of every attorney, every accountant, every city councilman who owed the Blackwood family a favor, and she had kept that information organized and accessible in a system she had built herself from scratch, because the one she inherited was a disaster. She was not, by any reasonable measure, someone who should have been easy to dismiss. But Damian Blackwood looked at her the way he always looked at her, like she was part of the furniture, useful, reliable, not particularly interesting. "I quit," she said. Effective Friday. He leaned back in his chair. He was a large man, Damian Blackwood. Not in an exaggerated way, not the kind of large that announces itself the moment you walk into a room, but the kind that you notice only when something changes, when he stills, when his attention sharpens, when the casual ease of his posture shifts into something quieter and more dangerous. He was 42. He had his father's jaw and his mother's eyes and a scar along his left collarbone that he never explained to anyone. He looked at her now the way he looked at problems he considered minor. "You're tired," he said. "Take the week." "I'm not tired." "Then what is it? Money?" Charlotte felt something move in her chest. Not anger exactly, something older and more tired than anger. "It's not money." "Then tell me what it is so we can fix it and move on." "There's nothing to fix," she said. "I've made a decision. I'm giving you 2 weeks' notice. I'll document everything, I'll brief whoever you hire, and I'll make the transition as clean as possible. But I'm leaving." He studied her for a moment, the way he studied things when he was deciding whether they were worth his actual attention. "Who got to you?" he said. It wasn't really a question. Nobody got to me. "Your sister." Charlotte's jaw tightened. "Don't. She's getting married, you feel guilty. You've decided to blow up your career because of a conversation at a dinner table." He said it flatly, without cruelty, as if he were simply identifying a mechanical problem. "I understand. Take the week, attend whatever event she needs you for, and we'll talk when you've had some distance from the emotion." She stood there for 4 full seconds, And in those 4 seconds, she made a decision that surprised even herself. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She didn't explain that it wasn't just the wedding, that it was the 11 sleepless days and the 6 drafts, with the deleted apologies and the gas station sandwich and the tally in her phone, and the slow creeping realization that she had spent 3 years being essential to a man who had never once, not once, asked her if she was all right. She just said, "Friday," and she walked out. She heard him say something behind her. She didn't stop. The Blackwood organization's legitimate holdings were housed under a parent company called Meridian Group, which owned real estate developments, a hospitality chain, 2 regional logistics companies, and a private equity arm that nobody outside the family fully understood. These were the businesses Charlotte managed on paper and in practice. The criminal infrastructure underneath was something else, something she understood peripherally, something she had learned not to look at directly, the way you learn not to look directly at a light source that could damage your eyes. She was not naive about what Damian Blackwood was. She had never been naive about it. What she had allowed herself to be, she understood now, was useful, and she had let usefulness become identity. She had let the empire's needs become her own calendar, her own emergency, her own reason to stay up until 2 in the morning cross-referencing quarterly reports and managing the egos of men who would not have given her the time of day if Damian hadn't personally vouched for her authority. She had done it because she was good at it. She had done it because being good at something, when you are 28 and new to a world this large and this dangerous, feels enough like purpose that you can mistake it for one. By the time she was 31, she understood the difference. And it had taken her sister sitting across from her at a kitchen table 3 weeks ago, face bright with engagement ring and future, asking Charlotte when was the last time she had done something that was only for herself. And Charlotte not being able to answer. Not a hesitation. A blank. She had sat there for a long moment trying to find something to point to. A vacation, a hobby, a single decision made purely out of personal desire rather than organizational necessity. And she couldn't find one. Not in the last year and a half. Not since somewhere around the 18-month mark when the job had finished absorbing whatever was left of her edges. "You're disappearing," her sister Emily had said. Not accusingly, just the way you say something true when you love someone and you've run out of gentler ways to say it. Charlotte had told her she was fine. She'd driven home and started draft 1 of the resignation letters. The first indication that something was wrong came on Wednesday. Charlotte had been methodically working through her documentation, building the operational handoff files, cataloging the contact database, creating step-by-step process notes for systems she had designed herself and therefore never had to explain before. It was meticulous work. It was also, she admitted to herself, a little painful, the way dismantling something you built is always painful regardless of how sure you are it's the right thing to do. Marcus Webb, Damian's head of security, and the man responsible for logistics coordination between the family's legitimate and less legitimate operations, appeared at her office door at 11:15 with an expression she recognized as controlled discomfort. "The Alderman Holdings closing," he said. "The real estate attorneys are saying they're missing the environmental compliance documentation for the Riverside site." Charlotte looked at him. "It's in the secondary filing cabinet, 3rd drawer, green folder, behind the Harrington correspondence." We looked. "Then someone misfiled it. Check the accounts receivable binder on the bottom shelf. I sometimes put overflow documents there when the cabinet is full." Marcus disappeared. He was back in 8 minutes, looking only slightly less tense. "Found it, thank you." "You're welcome." He hesitated in the doorway. "Is it true you're leaving?" "Friday," she said, and went back to her documentation. The second incident came Thursday morning. 2 of the logistics company's regional managers had apparently received contradictory scheduling directives because someone had updated the master operations calendar without cross-referencing the driver deployment spreadsheet, which was a system Charlotte had implemented precisely because this kind of conflict kept happening before she arrived. Neither manager knew which document took precedence. The answer was neither, because both needed to be reconciled against the actual contracted delivery windows, which lived in a third document that neither of them had access to. Charlotte spent 40 minutes on the phone resolving it. She went back to her documentation. Thursday afternoon, Damian's attorney called her directly because a signature page was missing from a land acquisition contract that was supposed to close by end of business. The page wasn't missing. It had been sent to the wrong email address because the contact information for the counterparty's counsel had been updated in the CRM system, but not in the personal correspondence folder where Damien's administrative staff, someone who was not Charlotte, had been pulling contact details from for the past 2 weeks. Charlotte found the signature page, identified the error, corrected the CRM record, resent the document, and followed up with a confirmation email. She sat back in her chair afterward and realized her hands were still moving over the keyboard from muscle memory, the way they always did when she was in the middle of something complex, and that she was still, even now, solving problems that were not technically hers to solve anymore. She stopped, made herself stop. She went back to the documentation. Friday came. She had everything ready. Handoff binders for each major operational area. A master index. A 60-page process document she had spent the last 3 evenings writing that covered, in clear language, every recurring task, every standing protocol, every exception process she had developed over 3 years. She had color-coded it. She had added a table of contents. She carried it all into Damien's office at 9 in the morning. He was on the phone. He held up one finger, the universal signal, and she waited. She stood in front of his desk with the binders stacked in her arms, and she waited the way she had waited 1,000 times before, and she made herself notice that she was doing it, made herself see the reflex for what it was, because that kind of noticing mattered now. He finished the call. He looked at the stack in her arms. Something moved behind his eyes, there and gone. "Put them down," he said. She put them on the desk. "The index is on top," she said. "Each binder is labeled. The process document covers everything I couldn't fit into a linear filing system. Whoever you hire will need time to get up to speed. I'd recommend bringing them in for at least 2 weeks of overlap if you can, but I understand that's not always possible with the timeline." He didn't look at the binders. He looked at her. "Charlotte, the attorneys have my personal contact information if there's something urgent in the first few weeks. I've told them to use it sparingly. Charlotte, I've also flagged 3 items in the index that need attention before the end of the month. They're marked in red. I'd prioritize—" "Stop." She stopped. The office was quiet. Somewhere outside this window, the city was doing what the city always did, indifferent and enormous and ongoing. Charlotte was aware of her own heartbeat in a way she usually wasn't. Not fast, just present, deliberate. "Sit down," Damien said. "I'd rather stand." A muscle moved in his jaw. It was the closest thing to discomfort she had ever seen on his face. "I need you to tell me what I did," he said. The question caught her off guard. It was the wrong question. Or maybe it was the most honest question he had ever asked her, and that was why it landed wrong, because she wasn't prepared for honesty from him. "You didn't do anything," she said. "That's not what this is." "Then explain it to me." "I already explained it. Tuesday. You decided I was emotionally compromised and offered me a week off." His jaw tightened again. "I handled that badly." "Yes, you did." "So let me—" "It's not about Tuesday," she said. "Tuesday was just Tuesday. It's 3 years of Tuesday. It's every Tuesday and every Wednesday and every 3 a.m. phone call that I answered because I was always available, and you never once thought to wonder why that was, whether it was healthy, whether I was all right, because I was functional, and functional was enough." She paused. "Not for effect. Just to breathe. I'm not angry at you. I want you to understand that. I'm really not. But I need to leave, and I need you to let me." He sat with that for a moment. Damien Blackwood was not a man who sat with things. He processed quickly, and he decided quickly, and he moved forward, always forward, because the alternative in his world was standing still, and standing still was how you died. But he sat with this. "You're serious," he said finally. "I've been serious since Tuesday." He looked at the binders. Something shifted in his expression, something that Charlotte, in 3 years of reading him, could not quite name. Not regret exactly. Something adjacent to it. Something he probably didn't have practice feeling. "I don't know who I'd bring in," he said, "not as a manipulation, just as a fact. I left recommendations in the index. Staffing agencies that specialize in executive operations, some names from my professional network who might be open to the conversation. They're good people. They're not you." The words sat between them. Charlotte picked up her jacket from the back of her chair. Her office was already cleared. She had done it the night before, quietly, so that today would be clean. "No," she said. "They're not. But that's the position you're in. And you'll figure it out. You always do. She walked to the door. Charlotte. She turned. Damien was standing now, which was unusual. He wasn't a man who stood up for conversations unless they mattered. His hands were at his sides. He looked, briefly, nakedly, like a man who had just understood something too late. Take care of yourself, she said. She left. She got 3 blocks before her phone started ringing. She let it ring. It rang again. She walked another block. A food cart was doing brisk business on the corner. A woman with a stroller was negotiating the curb. A pigeon was investigating something near a trash can with complete focus and total dedication, and Charlotte envied it briefly, the clarity of purpose. The phone rang a third time. She turned it face down in her bag and kept walking. The morning was clear and cold, the specific cold of a New York October that smells like exhaust and stone and the oncoming suggestion of winter. Charlotte walked 4 blocks, then 6, then 8. She wasn't going anywhere. She was just walking, because walking was what she knew how to do when she needed to remind herself that her body was her own and she could move it in any direction she chose. At the 9th block, she stopped at a coffee cart, bought a cup she didn't particularly need, and stood on the sidewalk drinking it. A taxi went past. A man in a suit walked into her peripheral vision and out again. The city hummed and pushed and moved around her the way it always did. She had done it. She had handed in the binders and walked out the door, and the sky had not fallen. It didn't feel the way she'd expected it to. She'd expected relief or grief or something large and definitive. What she felt instead was quieter than that, unsteady in a way that might become something else given time. Like the first morning after a long illness, when you're not sick anymore, but you're also not well yet. And the space between those two things is strange and uncertain and entirely your own. She finished the coffee. She dropped the cup in a trash can. She took out her phone, looked at the 3 missed calls, all from the same number, from Marcus, not from Damien, which told her something, and put it back in her bag. She turned and walked toward the subway, toward Emily, toward the woman she used to be before the empire swallowed her up, toward whatever came next. Behind her, in the glass and steel tower on 54th Street, 48 hours of unraveling had already begun. The first 48 hours after Charlotte left, nobody panicked. That was the problem. Nobody panicked because nobody understood yet what they had lost. The organization kept moving the way a body keeps moving after a serious injury, on momentum, on muscle memory, on the assumption that the systems would hold because the systems had always held. What nobody inside the Blackwood organization fully grasped was that the systems held because Charlotte held them, and Charlotte was gone. And the difference between those two things was about to become very, very clear. Marcus Webb understood it first. He understood it Saturday morning when he arrived at the office at 7:30 to pull the week's logistics schedules and discovered that the master operations file had been updated by someone on the overnight administrative team who had used the wrong version as a base document, effectively overwriting 3 weeks of scheduling adjustments that Charlotte had made and never formally documented because she had made them in real time, in her head, the way she made most adjustments, intuitively, quickly, without ceremony, because there had never been time for ceremony. He stood at the workstation for a long moment, looking at the screen. Then he called her. She answered on the 4th ring. He could hear street noise behind her, the particular texture of a Saturday morning in the city. A bus, wind, someone laughing at a distance. The operations file, he said. Version control. Do you know what the correct base document should be? A pause. The file saved Thursday at 11:14 p.m., she said. Not the one from Friday morning. Someone probably saw that Friday's version was timestamped more recently and assumed it was current. It wasn't. I was still working in Thursday's version through end of day Friday. Is there a way to recover it? Check the autosave folder under my old login credentials. Damien's IT team should still have access. The folder path is in the handoff documentation, 3rd binder, tab 7. Thank you. Marcus. Her voice changed, just slightly. That's the last one, all right? He didn't say anything for a moment. All right, he said. He pulled up the 3rd binder, tab 7. The folder path was exactly where she said it would be. He recovered the file in 11 minutes and spent the next 2 hours rebuilding the schedule from it, doing work that Charlotte would have done in 40 minutes because she understood every variable intuitively, and he was learning the variables in real time while also trying to do 3 other things. By noon on Saturday, He had a headache that wouldn't quit and a quiet, sinking feeling that they were in serious trouble. He did not tell Damien this. Not yet. Damien spent Saturday the way he spent most Saturdays when the operational load allowed it, in meetings with the family's legal team, reviewing the week's developments across the legitimate portfolio, running through the numbers with the Financial Oversight Committee. It was structured, controlled, familiar. He moved through it with the efficiency of long practice, asking the right questions, reading the right documents, making the right decisions. What he noticed, and what he did not comment on, was that everything took longer. The documents he needed were not always in the right place. The briefing summaries that Charlotte had always prepared, clean, precise, one page per topic, organized in the exact order they would be discussed, so that he could move through a meeting without stopping to search for context, were absent. In their place were stacks of source documents that he was expected to navigate himself. He did. I was not incapable of reading a financial summary without having it pre-digested. But it cost him time, and time in his world was the one resource you could not manufacture. By the end of Saturday afternoon, he had spent an extra 90 minutes on work that should have taken the morning. He sat in his office afterward, alone, and did not look at her desk through the interior window. The way he normally didn't look at it, except that now there was something different about the not looking, something deliberate in the avoidance, and that deliberateness bothered him. He pulled out his phone, looked at her number, put the phone down. He was not a man who called people to apologize. He was not even entirely sure he was a man who apologized, not in the clean, uncomplicated way that word implied. What he did, when he'd made an error, was identify the error and correct it. That was his version of accountability, and it had served him adequately in a world where most people accepted power as a substitute for contrition. Charlotte, he suspected, did not accept that substitution. He picked up the phone, put it down again, stood up, walked to the window and looked at the city below, the way he always looked at it when he needed to think, without the room pressing in on him. He had told her she was emotionally compromised. He replayed the moment with the uncomfortable clarity that only comes when you are alone and honest with yourself, which Damien Blackwood rarely was, by design. He had looked at the word resignation on that envelope, and his first instinct had not been concern. It had been dismissal. He had categorized it immediately: temporary disruption, emotional trigger, solvable within a week. He had not for a single moment considered that she might be right, that the problem might not be her state of mind, but his. He stood at the window for a long time. Then he called Marcus. "How bad is it?" he said. Marcus, to his credit, did not pretend not to know what he meant. "Manageable," Marcus said, and then, after a pause, "For now." "Be specific." Marcus was specific. The version control problem. The logistics conflict that had surfaced again. A different one this time, different managers, same underlying issue. The attorney's office had called twice about a compliance filing that needed to be submitted by Wednesday, and which required coordination between 3 separate documents that nobody had yet located in the same place. Damien listened. He did not interrupt. "And the alderman closing?" he said when Marcus finished. "Postponed 1 week. The environmental documentation was found, but the title review threw up a question about a zoning variance from 2019 that nobody has the original records for. Charlotte would know where those records are. I know. Find them without calling her." Another pause. "I'll try." "Don't try. Do it." He hung up and stood there for a moment with the phone in his hand and the distinct, uncomfortable sensation of a man who has broken something he didn't know he valued until it was in pieces. Sunday brought Nathaniel Brooks. He arrived at the Meridian Group offices at 10 in the morning for what had been scheduled as an introductory meeting with the financial oversight team. He was 45 with the kind of face that was easy to trust. Not handsome exactly, but organized, composed, the face of a man who had always made things work. He wore a dark suit that cost more than it appeared to and carried a leather portfolio that he set on the table with the quiet efficiency of someone who had sat in rooms like this many times and understood exactly how they operated. Damien had recruited him through a contact at a legitimate investment bank, 2 months of background checks and professional references and discreet inquiries, all of which had come back clean. Nathaniel Brooks had 17 years of experience in financial strategy, had restructured 3 mid-sized corporations in the past decade, and had a reputation for precision that people in that world used the word surgical to describe. He shook Damien's hand. His grip was firm, dry, unhurried. "I appreciate you making time on a Sunday," Nathaniel said. "I don't have time on weekdays," Damien said. "Sunday is what I have." Nathaniel nodded as if this were perfectly reasonable, which told Damien he had done his research. The meeting ran 90 minutes. Nathaniel asked good questions, specific, technical, the kind that demonstrated genuine familiarity with the portfolio rather than a surface reading of the prospectus. He identified 2 redundancies in the holding structure that Damien's existing team had apparently overlooked. He proposed a preliminary framework for reorganizing the private equity arm in a way that would reduce tax exposure across the legitimate businesses. Damien listened carefully. He also watched. He had developed, over 20 years in a world where the wrong read of a room could get you killed, an instinct for the difference between a man who was showing you what he knew and a man who was showing you what he wanted you to see. It was a subtle difference. Most people couldn't articulate it. Damien couldn't always articulate it either, but he felt it, the way you feel a change in air pressure before weather arrives. Nathaniel Brooks showed him a great deal. Damien kept that feeling in the back of his mind and said nothing about it. After the meeting, Marcus walked Nathaniel to the elevator and came back to Damien's office with his jacket already loosened, the way he always loosened it when he was thinking hard. "Thoughts?" Damien said. "Smart," Marcus said. "Very smooth." "Too smooth?" Marcus considered. "I'd want Charlotte's read." The name landed in the room, and neither of them acknowledged it directly. "Set up a second meeting for next week," Damien said. "I want the full financial team present." Marcus nodded and left, and Damien turned back to the window, and the feeling sat in the back of his mind like a stone he couldn't quite locate in his shoe. Emily's apartment was a third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn that smelled like coffee and fresh paint and the particular organized chaos of a woman in the middle of wedding planning. There were fabric swatches on the kitchen table and a spreadsheet printed and taped to the wall and a whiteboard with dates and arrows and question marks that Charlotte had been deliberately not looking at since she arrived Friday evening. She had been sleeping. That was the headline, the thing she kept noticing with a surprise that was itself a little alarming, that she was sleeping. Not the broken, interrupted, one-eye-open sleep of the past 3 years, but something deeper and more genuine, 7 and 8 hours. Waking up without an agenda, without a phone already lit with notifications, without the immediate sense of a dozen things already in motion that required her attention. She felt, on Sunday morning, something close to ordinary. Emily put coffee in front of her and sat down across the table with the expression of someone who had been waiting to ask a question and was only now deciding it was safe. "How are you actually?" Emily said. "Sleeping," Charlotte said, "which is new." "Are you sad?" Charlotte thought about it honestly, the way the past few days of quiet had made it easier to be honest with herself. "Not the way I expected to be. I thought I'd feel worse about leaving. Instead, I mostly just feel light, which is probably not a normal reaction to quitting a job you've had for 3 years. It's a completely normal reaction to putting down something that was too heavy," Emily said. Charlotte wrapped her hands around the coffee mug. "He called Marcus, not me. When things started falling apart, that's what I'm told." Emily's eyes sharpened. "Someone told you things were falling apart?" "Marcus called me Saturday morning about a version control problem. I told him where to find the file. He said it would be the last time." She paused. "It won't be the last time, not for a while. The organization runs on institutional knowledge that I never got a chance to properly transfer because nobody thought they needed me to properly transfer it." "Does that feel good or bad?" Charlotte considered that. "Complicated," she said. "I didn't want to be irreplaceable. Being irreplaceable was part of the trap. I wanted to be valued while I was there, not necessary in absentia." She looked at the coffee. "Those are different things." Emily reached across the table and put her hand over Charlotte's for a moment, the kind of gesture that doesn't require anything in return. "You know what I think?" Emily said. "I know what you're going to say. You should come to the venue tasting on Tuesday." Charlotte laughed, and the laugh surprised her, came out fuller than she expected, and that surprised her too. "Yes," she said, "I'll come to the venue tasting." Damien called her Monday morning at 7:42. She was still in bed. She watched the phone screen light up with his name, and she lay there and breathed and counted to 5 before she answered. Not because she was playing games, but because she needed the 5 seconds to decide who she was going to be in this conversation. "Damien," she said, "there's a zoning variance from 2019. His voice was the voice he used when he was working, direct, stripped of everything unnecessary. "Alderman Holdings, the Riverside site. We need the original documentation, and nobody can locate it." Charlotte closed her eyes. "It's in a physical archive, a banker's box, dark green, labeled Riverside Miscellaneous, stored in the secondary document room on the building's 4th floor. The variance approval is inside a manila envelope marked County Correspondence, rubber banded to 3 other documents from the same year. You'll know it because I wrote the date in red marker on the outside of the envelope." Silence on the line. "Thank you," he said. "Damien." "I know," he said. "I know. I'm not calling you back in. I just needed the document." "All right." Another silence. Damien did not do silence. Silence was where he was least comfortable, which meant that whatever came next had cost him something to reach. "You were right," he said. "What you said. Friday. You were right." Charlotte sat up in bed. Her shoulders settled. Something in her chest moved and resettled like a mechanism clicking into a new position. "I know," she said. "I didn't—" He stopped, started again. "I should have noticed. I didn't notice. I don't have a defense for it that I'd expect you to accept." "I don't need a defense," she said. "I needed it to stop." "It has stopped." "I know it has. That's why I left." He was quiet again. She could hear him breathing, could picture the office, the window, the particular way he stood when he was on the phone and working through something he couldn't quite put into language, weight on one foot, one hand in his pocket, jaw set. "I'm bringing in Nathaniel Brooks," he said. "Financial strategist. He starts formally next week. Marcus mentioned him. I'd want your assessment if you're willing, a quick call with him, professionally. I'm not an employee anymore." "I know that." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Something in his tone, not the words, the tone, the absence of pressure in it, the fact that he was asking rather than directing, was different from anything she had heard from him in 3 years. "Send me his file," she said. "I'll look at it. No promises. That's all I'm asking." She hung up and sat with the phone in her hands, and the morning light coming through Emily's window, and the strange sensation of being both outside something and still, somehow, tethered to its edge. The file arrived at noon. She read it at 2, sitting at Emily's kitchen table with the fabric swatches pushed to one side and a fresh cup of coffee going cold beside her. Nathaniel Brooks, 45. MBA from Wharton. 17 years in financial strategy, the last 6 as an independent consultant working with high net worth private clients. 3 corporate restructurings, all successful, all well documented. References that read well on paper. A LinkedIn profile that was notably sparse for someone with that many years in finance, but Charlotte knew better than to read too much into that. Some people were simply private. She read it twice, made 2 notes on a legal pad beside her, folded the pad, and put it in her bag. What she could not have articulated, not yet, was the specific quality of her unease. It wasn't anything in the document. It was the absence of something in the document, a texture she expected that wasn't there, the way a room that is too clean makes you wonder what was removed from it rather than simply accepting the cleanliness. She picked up the phone and called a contact of her own. A woman named Diane, who worked in corporate compliance at a financial law firm and owed Charlotte a professional favor from 2 years ago that had never been called in. "I need an informal check," Charlotte said when Diane picked up. "A name. Nathaniel Brooks, financial consultant. I need to know if the paper trail is real." "How informal?" "As informal as possible. And Diane, I need it fast." "Give me 24 hours, Diane said. Charlotte thanked her and hung up and sat for a moment with the legal pad and the 2 notes she had made, neither of which said anything definitive, both of which felt like the beginning of a question she didn't want the answer to. The answer came Tuesday evening, while Charlotte was sitting in a venue tasting with Emily and Emily's fiancé, Tom, eating miniature portions of 5 different chicken preparations and pretending to have opinions about the difference between them. Her phone buzzed with a message from Diane. She excused herself and stepped into the hallway. Diane's message was 4 lines. The first confirmed that Nathaniel Brooks' professional history was documented and verifiable. The second noted that his most recent corporate engagement had ended 18 months ago, not 6, as his file indicated. The third noted that one of the companies he had listed as a successful restructuring had, in fact, filed for bankruptcy 14 months after his engagement ended, under circumstances that had prompted a quiet SEC inquiry that was ultimately closed without charges. Closed, Diane had noted in parentheses, which means dropped or settled, not exonerated. The fourth line said, "I don't know what you're doing with this, but watch yourself." Charlotte stood in the hallway of a wedding venue with her phone in her hand and miniature chicken getting cold at the table behind her, and a quiet, cold certainty settling in her chest like water finding its level. She thought about calling Damien. She thought about what she would say if she did. She had a 2-line note on a legal pad and a 4-line text message and a feeling in her gut that she had learned, over 3 years of working in a world where information was power and the wrong move could destroy a great deal more than a career. None of that was evidence. All of it was signal. She needed more before she moved. She went back to the table. She ate the last of the chicken. She laughed at something Tom said about the floral arrangements. She held her sister's hand when Emily got a little emotional, describing the day she envisioned, the people she wanted around her, the life she was building. She was present. She was genuinely present in a way she hadn't been in years. And underneath that presence, quiet and growing and entirely without panic, was the beginning of the understanding that whatever she had walked away from was not finished with her yet, and that the man she had just placed inside Damien Blackwood's empire might be the most dangerous thing she had ever ignored on a Tuesday afternoon. By Wednesday morning, Nathaniel Brooks had already been inside the Blackwood financial systems for 72 hours. By Wednesday morning, Nathaniel Brooks had already been inside the Blackwood financial systems for 72 hours. And Charlotte was sitting at Emily's kitchen table with a legal pad, a cold cup of coffee, and the specific kind of focus that arrives not from energy, but from the absence of any acceptable alternative. She had been up since 4:30, not because she couldn't sleep. She had slept 5 hours, which was more than she'd averaged in the last year at the organization. She had woken up at 4:30 because something had moved in her mind while she was sleeping, the way problems sometimes do when you stop pushing at them directly and let the quieter part of your brain work on them without supervision. She had woken up with a specific question that had not been there when she closed her eyes. Why 14 months? Nathaniel Brooks's restructuring engagement had ended, per Diane's information, 14 months before the company filed for bankruptcy. Not immediately. Not 6 months. 14. Long enough to look like coincidence. Long enough for any direct connection to blur into the noise of normal corporate failure. Long enough that the SEC inquiry, when it came, had very little to attach itself to. 14 months was not an accident. 14 months was a design. She wrote it on the legal pad, circled it, wrote beneath it. What did he move in those 14 months that nobody found? Then she wrote, what is he moving now? She called Diane at 6:50, which was earlier than was reasonable, and Diane answered on the second ring because Diane was the kind of person who was always already awake, always already working, one of those people who treated sleep as an administrative inconvenience. I need the names of the companies, Charlotte said. The restructurings, all 3. Charlotte, I know it's early. I know I'm asking for more than the favor covers. I'll owe you. A pause. You don't owe me anything, but this is starting to feel like something that should involve lawyers. It will, Charlotte said. Not yet. The names. Diane gave her the names. Charlotte wrote them down. She spent the next 2 hours in Emily's kitchen doing the kind of research that is invisible from the outside, reading corporate filings, cross-referencing subsidiary structures, following the paper trail of vendor relationships and service contracts through the publicly available records of 3 companies that Nathaniel Brooks had touched in the past 7 years. What she found was not dramatic. It was never dramatic, the real evidence. It was tedious and technical and easy to miss if you weren't looking for the specific shape of it. The shape was this. In each of the 3 companies, in the 18 months surrounding Nathaniel's engagement, there were vendor payments to service companies with names that were professionally generic, consultancy firms, logistics providers, technical service groups, that appeared once or twice in the accounts payable records and then disappeared. The payments were not large individually. Collectively, across 3 companies, they added up to a number that sat at the back of Charlotte's mind and wouldn't stop sitting there. She needed to see the Blackwood accounts. She no longer had access to the Blackwood accounts. She sat with that fact for a moment. Then she picked up the phone and called Damien. He answered before the second ring, which meant he had been awake, which meant he had been working, which meant the organization was already in a mode that Damien only activated when something was genuinely wrong. "I need access to the Meridian Group accounts," Charlotte said. "Current accounts payable, the last 90 days. And I need the vendor contracts that Nathaniel Brooks has had any contact with since he was brought in for preliminary meetings." Silence. "Charlotte, I know how this sounds. Tell me anyway," she told him. Not everything. Not the 4:15 a.m. awakening, not the legal pad, not the part where she had spent 2 hours in her sister's kitchen following a paper trail that was technically none of her business anymore. She told him the facts, the discrepancy in the timeline, the SEC inquiry, the pattern she had identified across the 3 previous companies, and the specific shape of that pattern as it might apply to a financial operation the size of Meridian Group. Damien listened without interrupting. She had always respected that about him. Whatever his failings, he listened without interrupting when the information was serious. "You're saying he's done this before," Damien said. "I'm saying the pattern exists. I'm not saying anything else until I see the current accounts. If I give you access and you're right, then we have a very serious problem that started 72 hours ago and is getting worse every hour we wait. And if you're wrong, then I've wasted a morning and you've wasted a temporary login credential and we never mention it again." She paused. "Damien, give me the access." He gave her the access. 14 minutes later, she had a temporary read-only login to the Meridian Group financial system sitting in her email inbox, and she was already opening it before she had finished reading the message it came in. She found the first one in 40 minutes. A vendor payment, processed Monday, 2 days after Nathaniel Brooks had been formally introduced to the financial oversight team, to a company called Vertex Operational Services, LLC. The payment was for $48,000, categorized as consulting services, authorized under the new financial strategy review protocol that Nathaniel had proposed in Sunday's meeting and that Damien's team had apparently approved without a secondary review process because Nathaniel had recommended efficiency in the authorization structure and nobody had pushed back. Charlotte pulled up Vertex Operational Services, LLC in the business registry. It had been incorporated 11 days ago. She sat back in her chair. Emily came into the kitchen in her bathrobe, took one look at Charlotte's face, and quietly made coffee without saying anything, which was one of the things Charlotte loved most about her sister. Charlotte found 2 more by 9 a.m. Different names, different amounts, same structure. Young companies, recently incorporated, no digital footprint beyond their registration documents. Combined total across the 3 payments, $114,000. Moved in the first 72 hours of Nathaniel's formal access to the financial systems. $114,000 was not, in the context of the Blackwood Empire's finances, a catastrophic sum. It was the kind of sum that could pass through a quarterly review without triggering automated alerts, if the amounts were calibrated correctly. If they were calibrated correctly. She checked the thresholds in the authorization protocol. They were calibrated correctly. Her hands were steady when she picked up the phone. She had learned in 3 years of managing crises in an organization where crises were a constant that steadiness was a choice you made before the adrenaline arrived, not after. You decided to be steady, and then you were steady, and your body caught up to the decision eventually. She called Damien. 3 payments, she said when he answered. $114,000. Shell companies, all incorporated within the last 2 weeks. This isn't exploratory. He's already running the mechanism. She heard Damien's breath change, a specific tightening, the sound of a man recalibrating. "Where are you?" he said. "Brooklyn." "I need you here." "I know." "How soon?" She was already standing, already looking for her jacket. "An hour." She walked into the Blackwood building at 10:17 and felt the shift immediately. The particular atmospheric change of a place that is pretending to be calm while something urgent moves underneath it. The front desk staff smiled at her with the practiced neutrality of people who had been told not to react to her arrival. Marcus met her at the elevator with the controlled expression of a man who had been awake since before dawn and was managing it by sheer discipline. He's in the secondary conference room, Marcus said, not the main office. Charlotte understood why. The main office had glass walls. The secondary conference room had a door that closed. Damien was standing when she walked in. Not pacing. Damien didn't pace, but standing, which was his version of it. He had his jacket off, his sleeves rolled to the forearm, and the particular set to his jaw that she had seen exactly 4 times in 3 years, always in situations where what was at stake was not money or business, but something foundational. He looked at her when she walked in, and something in his expression shifted briefly, something she didn't have time to examine before it resettled into the operational. "Show me," he said. She showed him. Laptop on the conference table, the 3 payments pulled up side by side, the incorporation dates, the authorization chain. She walked him through the pattern she had identified in the previous companies, the 14-month lag, the calibration of the amounts below the alert thresholds, the way the vendor names were designed to sound legitimate and forgettable at the same time. Damien stood behind her and looked at the screen. She could feel the heat of his presence, the controlled stillness of him processing something he didn't want to be true. "He's been in the system 3 days, Damien said, and he's already moved 114,000. That's not the money. The money is exploratory. He's testing the authorization flow, confirming the threshold calibration, making sure the mechanism works before he scales it." She pulled up the second tab. These are the vendor relationships he reviewed in Sunday's meeting. He recommended renegotiating 3 of them. "I need to see the contracts before he touches them." Why the contracts? Because if he follows the same pattern, the vendor renegotiations aren't about efficiency. They're about introducing new counterparties into the contract structure, counterparties that he controls, that will then become the channels for larger transfers. The shell company payments are pocket change. The contract replacements are where the real mechanism lives. Damien was quiet for a moment. "How much?" he said. "If he follows the same scale as the previous operations, adjusted for Meridian Group size." She had done the math on the subway, on the back of a receipt she'd found in her bag, because she hadn't had paper and she'd needed to put the numbers somewhere. Potentially 8 figures, over 12 to 18 months, in amounts small enough to avoid triggering federal reporting thresholds. Damien put both hands flat on the conference table. He stood like that for a long moment, and Charlotte watched the muscles in his forearms, the specific tension of a man absorbing something that required a fundamental adjustment to his understanding of the situation he was in. "He had impeccable references," Damien said. Not defensively, just the fact, placed there, like he was already doing the post-mortem. His references are real. His history is real. The companies were real. He restructures them genuinely. That's the cover. The fraud happens in the aftermath, after he's gone, through the vendor relationships and contract structures he's already embedded. By the time anything surfaces, he's been retained by someone else for 8 months. And this time the target is bigger. This time I don't think he's planning to wait 14 months. She met his eyes. "I think the scale of what he's planning requires him to move faster, which means we have less time than the pattern suggests." Damien straightened up. He rolled his right sleeve 1 fold tighter, a gesture she had learned meant he had moved from processing to deciding. "I want him out of the building today," he said. "No." He looked at her. "If you move on him now, he disappears and you have nothing recoverable," she said. "He's not stupid. He has exit protocols for exactly this scenario. You pull his access today, by tomorrow there's no trace of where the money went, the shell companies dissolve and you've lost $114,000 and your only evidence." She held his gaze. "You need to let him keep working, and you need to let me watch him while he does." The silence in the conference room had a different quality than the silence before. This one had weight. "You're not an employee," Damien said. "No. What you're describing would require you to come back into the organization in some capacity. Temporarily, unofficially, as a consultant with read-only access to the financial systems and a direct line to your legal team." She paused. "And Damien, you need to bring in someone outside the organization, someone with federal connections who works financial crimes. Because where this ends, you cannot be the one holding the bag." His jaw worked. She could see him calculating the implications. Not just the fraud, but the exposure that came with inviting federal scrutiny anywhere near the Blackwood organization's legitimate holdings. The razor's edge of presenting evidence without opening doors he couldn't close again. "There are people," he said carefully, attorneys who work that interface. Then call them today, before he makes another move. Marcus knocked and opened the conference room door without waiting, which meant it was urgent enough to override protocol. Nathaniel's in a meeting with the contract review team, Marcus said. He's proposing to replace the primary logistics vendor, the new vendor he's recommending. I ran a quick check. He looked at Charlotte. It was incorporated 3 weeks ago. The three of them stood in the conference room, and the information settled over the room like temperature dropping. Charlotte turned back to Damien. Today, she said. What nobody had accounted for was that Nathaniel was watching too. He had been watching since Sunday, since the meeting where Damien's eyes had held that particular quality of assessing rather than receiving, the quality of a man who was listening at 2 levels simultaneously. Nathaniel had worked with enough powerful men to recognize the difference between a man who trusted you and a man who was deciding whether to trust you, and Damien Blackwood, for all his careful stillness in that meeting, had been deciding. Nathaniel had accelerated his timeline by 36 hours the moment he walked out of that meeting. The vendor payments on Monday were not exploratory. They were a test of a different kind, not of the threshold calibrations, which he had already confirmed through back-channel access to the system's architecture before his first formal meeting, but of the organization's response time, how quickly they noticed, whether they noticed at all. Nobody had called him by Tuesday afternoon. By Wednesday morning, he was in the contract review meeting feeling relatively comfortable. Then Charlotte Whitmore walked into the building at 10:17, and Nathaniel, who was sitting in a glass-walled conference room 40 feet from the elevator bank, watched her cross the lobby in his peripheral vision and felt the specific cold contraction of a plan encountering an unanticipated variable. He knew her name. He had done thorough research on the Blackwood organization's operational structure before approaching it. He had noted her departure with professional satisfaction. Removing the most operationally aware person from an organization before you moved against it was the kind of advantage you didn't engineer, you accepted as a gift. She wasn't supposed to be back. He kept his face neutral and his voice steady through the remainder of the contract review meeting and excused himself at 11:15 for a scheduled call that did not exist. In the stairwell between the 3rd and 4th floors, he sent 3 messages, one to a lawyer in Delaware, one to a banking contact in the Cayman Islands, one to a number saved under a first name only, and a contact list that lived on a phone that was not his primary device. The messages were identical and brief. Accelerate. He went back to the contract review meeting. He smiled at the vendor's representative across the table and said something collegial about the supply chain landscape and made a note in his portfolio that nobody else could read. And underneath the note, he had already begun revising the timeline in his head with the specific, airless focus of a man who had been in this position before and understood that the difference between escape and disaster was usually measured not in strategy, but in hours. Charlotte didn't see him come back from the stairwell. She was in the secondary conference room with Damien and Marcus, and a lawyer named Hartley, who had arrived at 11:30 and was now sitting across the table from her with his hands folded and the expression of a man being asked to walk a very specific tightrope. The federal connection you need, Hartley said, is an attorney who has an established relationship with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I know 2. Both good, both expensive, both capable of presenting evidence in a way that keeps the Meridian Group's structure out of the blast radius. He paused. To the extent that's possible. What does to the extent that's possible mean in this context? Damien said. It means that any federal investigation of Nathaniel Brooks will involve scrutiny of the organization he targeted. That scrutiny will be limited if the evidence you present is credible and your cooperation is genuine. It will be less limited if there are other things in the Meridian Group's accounts that you'd prefer federal investigators not to examine closely. The room was quiet. Charlotte looked at the table. This was the part she had known was coming. The part where Damien's world and her instincts about right and wrong arrived at the same crossroads, and she had to decide how much she was willing to see and how much she was willing to navigate around. Work the legitimate holdings only, she said to Hartley. The Meridian Group entities are clean, audited annually, genuine revenue, real employees. That's what we're protecting, and that's what the evidence will pertain to. Nothing else comes into this room. Hartley looked at Damien. Damien looked at Charlotte. Something moved through his expression. Complicated, weighted, honest in a way that she had rarely seen from him. What she said, Damien told Hartley. Hartley nodded. I'll make the call this afternoon. After Hartley left, Charlotte and Damien were alone in the conference room. Marcus had stepped out to manage the contract review meeting, to slow it down, extend it, buy time without Nathaniel sensing the delay was deliberate. Charlotte gathered the papers in front of her into a stack. She needed her hands to be doing something. You came back, Damien said. I came back for this specific situation. That's not the same thing as coming back. I know the difference. She looked at him. Do you? He held her gaze without flinching, which was the thing about Damien Blackwood that had always been true. Whatever else he was, he did not look away from difficult things once he had decided to face them. I'm asking you to take the chief of operations position, he said. I was going to ask before any of this happened. I want you to know that. You were going to ask me to come back. Not as an assistant, as the person who actually runs this organization, with the authority to match the responsibility. He paused. What you described to Hartley, the separation, the clean structure, that's what I want. That's what I should have built years ago. I want you to build it. Charlotte set down the papers. She looked at the conference room wall, the blank expanse of it, and she thought about Emily's apartment and the fabric swatches and the venue tasting and the way 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep had felt like a revelation. She thought about the legal pad on Emily's kitchen table with the 2 notes she had made, and the way those 2 notes had led her here, to this room, to this choice, because that was apparently the kind of woman she was, the kind who noticed things she could not then unnotice, who followed threads she could not then put down. I'll finish this, she said, whatever it takes to put Nathaniel Brooks in front of a federal prosecutor. I'll finish it. She picked up the papers again. After that, we talk about the rest. Damien nodded. It was the nod of a man accepting terms he understood were fair, which was itself something new. Charlotte's phone buzzed on the table between them. It was a message from Diane. 1 line, no preamble. He's not working alone. The Delaware LLC that held 2 of the previous vendors. I found a second signatory. Someone with access to financial intelligence at the federal level. Charlotte, whoever this is, they have a contact inside law enforcement. Charlotte read it twice. Then she looked up at Damien and felt the floor of the situation shift beneath her in the specific way it shifts when you understand that what you thought was the problem is only the surface of the problem, and the thing underneath it is something of a different order entirely. We can't use Hartley's federal contact, she said. Damien's eyes sharpened. Why? She turned the phone so he could read the message. He read it, his jaw set. She watched the calculation move through him. Fast, silent. The processing of a man who had spent 20 years surviving in a world where the ground shifted regularly, and the only reliable response was to find new ground before the old ground finished moving. If he has someone inside federal law enforcement, Damien said slowly, then any approach we make through normal legal channels gets back to him within hours, Charlotte said, and he disappears before we've assembled enough evidence to follow. The room was very quiet. Outside the conference room's closed door, the building moved through its Wednesday morning, ordinary and ongoing. Somewhere on the 3rd floor, Nathaniel Brooks was sitting in a contract review meeting with a revised timeline in his head and 3 accelerate messages sent, and he did not know yet that Charlotte had found the shell companies, but he knew she was here, and he was already moving. Charlotte looked at Damien across the conference table and understood, with complete and unsparing clarity, what the next step required. They could not go to federal law enforcement through any channel that Nathaniel might have access to. They could not move against him openly without triggering his exit. They could not wait, because every hour they waited, he moved more money and reinforced more positions, and the evidence they needed became harder to assemble cleanly. What they had to do was let him believe he had won. What they had to do was stay in the room with a man who was actively dismantling the organization around them, smile at him across meeting tables, include him in strategy sessions, give him enough access to continue the fraud while secretly documenting every transaction, every shell company, every instruction he sent to his outside contacts, and do all of it without a single person inside the building giving any indication that anything had changed. What they had to do, Charlotte understood, was become something she had spent 3 years carefully not becoming. People who could hold a lie so completely that it left no seam. She had always been honest. It had been in some ways her only real armor in a world that ran on deception. She looked at Damien and he looked at her, and neither of them said what they were both thinking, because saying it would make it more real than either of them were ready for in that particular moment. Then Charlotte said, "I need a cover reason for being back in the building, something Nathaniel will accept without questions." Damien didn't hesitate. "Transition consulting. You came back voluntarily to assist with the financial strategy integration. Nathaniel's integration." He let that settle. "You're here to help him." The words sat between them with the particular weight of irony that isn't funny. "All right," Charlotte said. She gathered her papers, straightened them, squared the corners the way she always did when she was preparing to walk into a room she needed to own. "Introduce me to him at lunch," she said. "Make it casual. Make it look like you called me back as a favor to him." Damien stood. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "Can you do this?" It was the first time in 3 years he had asked her that question. Not assigned, not directed, but asked with the full acknowledgement that it was a real question, and the answer was genuinely uncertain. Charlotte picked up her bag. "I've been doing impossible things for this organization for 3 years," she said. "The difference is, this time I chose it." She walked to the conference room door, and outside that door, on the 3rd floor of the Blackwood building, Nathaniel Brooks was gathering his portfolio and preparing to recommend the dissolution of the primary logistics vendor contract, and the clock on the situation was running, and Charlotte Whitmore stepped back into the empire she had left 9 days ago, carrying nothing but what she knew and the willingness to use it in ways she had never intended. The lunch introduction happened at 12:40 in the Meridian Group's executive dining room on the 7th floor, which was not really a dining room so much as a large conference table with better catering and windows that looked north toward the park. Nathaniel Brooks was already seated when Charlotte walked in with Damien. She had 11 minutes between the conference room and this moment to become someone else. Not completely, not in any way that would require her to perform, because performance was detectable, and Nathaniel Brooks was not a man who missed things. What she needed to become was simply the version of herself that had existed before she understood what he was. Professional, capable, slightly tired from the transition, present. She had fixed her hair in the elevator mirror. That was all the preparation she allowed herself. Damien made the introduction with the casual ease of a man for whom social orchestration was a practiced skill. "Nathaniel, this is Charlotte Whitmore. She ran operations here for 3 years. I persuaded her to come back temporarily to help with the financial strategy integration. She knows the systems better than anyone." Nathaniel stood and extended his hand. His grip was the same as she'd read about him. Firm, dry, unhurried. His eyes moved over her face with a quality of assessment that was quick and almost invisible, the kind of look that would register as simple politeness to anyone not specifically watching for it. Charlotte watched for it. "Charlotte," he said, "I've heard good things." "From who?" she said pleasantly, sitting down. A fractional pause. "Damien mentioned your work on the operational structure." "He's generous." She unfolded her napkin. "I'm looking forward to seeing what you're building with the financial side. The legitimate portfolio has needed a strategic overhaul for a while." Nathaniel smiled. It reached his eyes exactly as far as it needed to. "We're just getting started." "I know," Charlotte said. "I've been looking at the vendor review you're running. The logistics contract replacement. I had some thoughts about the transition timeline, if you're open to it." She watched the micro-adjustment in his posture, invisible to anyone not looking for it. The slight recalibration of a man who has been told a variable has appeared and is now measuring the variable in real time. "Always open," he said. Damien said nothing. He ate. He asked Nathaniel 2 questions about the financial strategy framework and listened to the answers with the attentiveness of a man who was interested, which was a performance Charlotte had not known he was capable of until now, and which she filed away with something adjacent to respect. The lunch lasted 40 minutes. When it was done, Nathaniel shook both their hands and returned to the 3rd floor, and Charlotte watched him walk to the elevator and felt the specific, cold clarity of someone who has just sat across a table from a predator and smiled at it for 40 minutes without letting her hands shake. Her hands had not shaken. She was mildly surprised. The next 6 days were the most disciplined of Charlotte's professional life. She arrived at the Blackwood building every morning at 8:30, which was 30 minutes after Nathaniel arrived, a timing she had calibrated deliberately so that she was never in the position of being in the building when he wasn't. She worked from a desk in the operational wing with red access to the financial systems, and a direct, encrypted line to Hartley. Not the federal contact Hartley had originally proposed, but a second attorney he had brought in, a woman named Sandra Voss, who worked financial crimes cases through a private channel that Nathaniel's contact inside federal law enforcement would have no visibility into. Sandra Voss had been in this work for 19 years. She had a flat, efficient voice and the habit of asking questions in groups of three, always moving from general to specific, and she absorbed the evidence Charlotte sent her with the quiet appetite of someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of case. The shell company pattern is textbook, Sandra told Charlotte on the second day. We've seen this structure before, different actors, same architecture. The sophistication is in the calibration. He's done this enough times to know exactly where the automated monitoring thresholds sit. Can you use what we have? Not yet. What you have is suggestive. What I need is transactional, money moving through the shell companies to a destination that we can trace. Right now, the vendors are receiving payments, but we haven't confirmed where those payments go afterward. How long to confirm? Depends on how fast he moves. If he's accelerating, he is, Charlotte said. He accelerated the moment I walked back into the building. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Then we may have less time than I'd like. Keep documenting. Every payment, every vendor interaction, every communication you can legitimately access. Don't reach for anything you'd need unauthorized access to get. I know. I mean it. Anything outside your authorization compromises the evidence chain. I know, Charlotte said again, and meant it, and understood that the constraint was also a kind of lifeline, that the discipline of staying within the lines was what would make the case unassailable when it finally arrived in front of a prosecutor. She documented. Every morning and every afternoon and sometimes into the evening, sitting at the desk in the operational wing building, a parallel record of every financial movement that touched the accounts under Nathaniel's influence. She built it the way she built everything, methodically, cross-referenced, with a clarity of organization that would allow Sandra Voss to move through it quickly when the time came. She also watched Nathaniel, not directly, never directly. She watched him the way she had learned to watch things in 3 years of managing an organization full of powerful men who noticed when they were being watched, peripherally, through the texture of other things. She noted how long his calls ran. She noted when he went to the stairwell versus the men's room. She noted the specific quality of his attention in meetings, when it sharpened and when it wandered, and she began to build a picture of his schedule that was not the schedule he presented to the organization, but the schedule underneath it, the one that ran in parallel. On day 4, she identified the calls. He took them in the stairwell between floors 3 and 4, always between 10:40 and 11:15 in the morning, never longer than 8 minutes. She had no way to hear them. She had no way to know with certainty what they contained. But the timing was consistent enough that it was clearly a standing arrangement. And standing arrangements in this context meant someone on the other end of those calls was monitoring the situation, which meant Nathaniel was reporting to someone, which meant the operation was not his alone. She told Sandra. Can you get a location on the calls? Sandra asked. Not without access I don't have. Then document the timing pattern. Consistent timing is circumstantial, but it's useful for establishing the operational structure. If we can show he was receiving regular instruction during the period of the fraud, that supports a conspiracy charge rather than individual action. Charlotte added the timing pattern to the documentation. She noted the dates, the windows, the duration. She did it with the same careful attention she had given to every other piece of the record, and she did not think too hard about what it meant that she was this good at this, or about how much of the skill set she had developed in 3 years of keeping a criminal empire organized was now being applied, with perfect equivalence, to dismantling a threat to that empire. She thought about it at night, alone in Emily's apartment, after Emily was asleep. She lay in the dark and she thought about it, and she didn't come to any conclusions that were clean or comfortable, and eventually she stopped trying to reach clean conclusions and just went to sleep. Day 6 broke open at 9:50 in the morning. Charlotte was at her desk reviewing a vendor payment batch when the automated alert she had set up on the accounts payable system triggered, a payment above the previous threshold, one she had specifically calibrated the alert to catch. 50% above the previous payments. $211,000 to a vendor called Crestline Advisory Group, incorporated in Delaware, 8 days old. She pulled up Crestline Advisory Group and felt her stomach contract. The registered agent was different from the previous shell companies. The address was different. The incorporation structure was different. Not the same Delaware template attorney, not the same generic naming convention. If she had been looking at this payment in isolation, without the context of the previous pattern, Crestline Advisory Group would have looked like a legitimate vendor relationship. He had changed the structure. He knew she was looking. Charlotte sat very still for approximately 4 seconds. Then she picked up the phone and called Sandra Voss. "He's changed the shell company structure," she said when Sandra answered. "New template, new registered agent, new naming convention. He knows someone is looking at the vendor payments." "Does he know it's you specifically?" "He suspects. He can't know what I have access to without knowing someone told Damien." She paused. "But he's smart enough to change the pattern on suspicion alone." "Does the new structure break the evidence chain?" Charlotte looked at the screen. "No, I can connect Crestline to him through the authorization chain. He personally approved the vendor onboarding. The previous shell companies are still documented. It adds a layer of complexity, but it doesn't break the chain." "Good. Then we keep going." "Sandra." Charlotte lowered her voice. "If he's changed the structure because he suspects the surveillance, he may also be preparing an exit. He's not going to wait until the mechanism is fully operational if he thinks the risk has increased. He'll take what he has and move." A pause. "How much has he moved so far?" "Total? Approximately 480,000. "That's not what he came here for." "No, it's not. Which means if he's preparing to exit, he's planning one large move before he goes. Not the slow drain mechanism, something faster." Charlotte looked at the payment batch on her screen and thought about the pattern she had mapped across the previous 3 companies, the 14-month lag, the calibrated amounts, and then she thought about the fact that Nathaniel had accelerated his timeline the moment she walked back into the building, and she thought about the call he had made on Wednesday from the stairwell that had triggered 3 accelerate messages, and she understood with the kind of clarity that arrives when all the pieces arrange themselves at once that they had been looking at the wrong threat. The shell company payments were not the operation. They had never been the operation. They were, exactly as she had originally theorized, the mechanism test. But she had assumed the primary operation would be the vendor contract replacements, the slow infiltration of the supply chain over months. She had been wrong about the timeline. Nathaniel wasn't planning to run a slow drain over 12 to 18 months. He had walked into the Blackwood organization with a different endgame, one that the accelerated timeline had obscured. "Sandra," she said, "I need to look at something. I'll call you back." She hung up and opened the financial systems and pulled up the Meridian Group's investment accounts. Not the operating account she had been monitoring, but the investment portfolio. The private equity arm. The holdings that represented, in aggregate, the Blackwood family's most significant legitimate assets. She had been watching the wrong accounts. She found it in 11 minutes, a series of stock trades executed through the investment portfolio over the past 5 days. Not large trades individually, each one within the normal parameters of the portfolio's activity, each one authorized through the appropriate chain, each one defensible in isolation as routine portfolio management. But laid out in sequence, with the timing and direction of each trade mapped against each other, the pattern was unmistakable. Nathaniel Brooks had spent the past 5 days systematically repositioning the Meridian Group's investment portfolio to amplify the impact of a specific event. He had moved the portfolio into a configuration that would lose catastrophically if Meridian Group's stock price dropped sharply. He had also, through a series of shell companies she hadn't been watching because she hadn't known to watch them, established short positions against Meridian Group's publicly traded subsidiaries. He wasn't planning to steal from the organization. He was planning to destroy it. And he was going to trigger the destruction himself by releasing something, information, fabricated or real, it didn't matter which, that would cause Meridian Group's stock to collapse, at which point the investment portfolio would crater, the short positions he controlled would pay out enormously, and the Blackwood family's legitimate empire would be left in ruins while Nathaniel walked away with a number that had 8 figures in it. Charlotte's hand found the edge of the desk and gripped it. She sat like that for a moment, not from panic, but from the necessity of absorbing what she was looking at before she could decide what to do with it. Then she called Damien. "I was in a meeting." Marcus pulled him out. Charlotte heard the sound of a door, footsteps, a corridor. Then Damien's voice, low and already taut. "Talk." She told him. She told him in the flat, sequential way she had learned to deliver urgent information, facts in order, conclusion at the end, no editorializing, no softening. She told him about the investment portfolio, the trade pattern, the short positions, the eight-figure number she estimated was on the other side of the collapse. The silence on the line had a physical quality. "He's not stealing from us," Damien said slowly. "He's shorting us. And he has the trigger ready. Some kind of information release, fabricated financial irregularities, a regulatory complaint, a creditor dispute. It doesn't matter what the specific vehicle is. When he releases it, the stock drops, his short positions pay out, and the investment portfolio loses enough to make recovery a multi-year problem if it's recoverable at all." "When?" "I don't know. But the portfolio positioning is complete. He's done the setup. The only thing left is pulling the trigger." She paused. "Damien, it could be today. It could be tonight. If he suspects the surveillance has closed in, where is he now?" Charlotte looked at the clock on the computer screen. 10:43. "He should be in the stairwell. He takes calls between 10:40 and 11:15. I want him watched, not by my people, someone he won't recognize." "Marcus has someone. Tell Marcus." "I already texted him. He's moving." Damien was quiet for 2 seconds. "Sandra Voss. I'm calling her next. She needs to know about the short positions. That changes the legal framework. This isn't just financial fraud. This is market manipulation. That's a federal securities crime, and it has a different evidentiary standard and different contacts inside the SEC. Do it." "Damien," she stopped. Made herself say the next part carefully. "The information he's planning to release. If it's fabricated, we can challenge it. If it's real, if there's something in the Meridian Group's actual history that he found and is planning to use as the trigger." "There isn't." "Are you certain?" A beat of silence that lasted 1 second longer than certainty should have required. "The legitimate holdings are clean," he said. "You know that better than anyone." "I know," she said. "I needed you to say it." She hung up and called Sandra Voss and spent 8 minutes walking her through the short positions and the investment portfolio pattern, and Sandra's voice, usually flat and controlled, took on an edge that Charlotte recognized as the sound of a lawyer who has just understood that the case she has been building is significantly larger than she thought. "Market manipulation," Sandra said. "You're certain." "The trade pattern is documented in the portfolio records with timestamps. It's been building for 5 days. I need those records, all of them. Everything you've documented, Charlotte. Send it now. Don't wait for anything cleaner. Send what you have." Charlotte sent it. All of it. The shell company payments, the timing logs, the vendor authorization chain, the investment trade pattern, the short position analysis she had assembled in the past 22 minutes. She sent it with the organized clarity that she always brought to documentation, labeled and indexed, because even now, even with her heart running faster than she wanted to acknowledge, she understood that the quality of the evidence package was the difference between an arrest and an escape. Nathaniel Brooks came back from the stairwell at 11:19, 4 minutes past his usual window. Charlotte was at her desk when he walked past the operational wing. She did not look up from her screen. She heard his footsteps, the particular rhythm of his walk, which she had cataloged without deciding to, the way you catalog sounds in an environment you're trying to understand. And she heard them slow almost imperceptibly as they passed her doorway. She kept her eyes on the screen. The footsteps continued. She breathed. At 11:30, Marcus appeared in her doorway. He didn't come in. He stood in the frame with his jacket on, which meant he was about to move. "He made 2 calls," Marcus said quietly. "Our person caught both numbers. One to a Delaware area code, one to a London exchange." Charlotte looked up. "London? A financial institution. We're running the number." London meant the short positions were held through an overseas account. London meant the payout structure was international, which meant Sandra Voss's SEC contacts needed to loop in federal financial intelligence, which meant the case was about to get significantly more complex, and the window for catching Nathaniel before he triggered the collapse and disappeared into an international financial structure was narrowing by the hour. "I need those numbers," Charlotte said. "Sandra Voss's office already has them." Charlotte stood up. "Where's Damien?" "Conference room. He wants you." She followed Marcus down the corridor and into the conference room and found Damien standing at the window with his phone in his hand and an expression she had seen only once before, on the day a business partner of his had made a move against the family that had cost 3 people their livelihoods, and Damien had spent 6 hours saying nothing before he said exactly what he meant. The expression of a man who has moved past anger into something quieter and more permanent. Sandra says 48 hours, he said without turning around. At best, if his short positions are structured to pay out on a market event and he's made 2 calls in the last hour, she thinks the trigger event could be as soon as tonight's aftermarket news cycle. Can she freeze the short positions? She's working on an emergency application, but it requires demonstrating imminent market harm, and the judge she needs is unavailable until 3 p.m. Charlotte looked at the clock on the wall. 12:04. 3 hours, she said. 3 hours, Damien said. He turned from the window. His face was controlled, but she could see the tension in the muscles around his eyes, the specific exhaustion of a man who had been managing a crisis in silence for 6 days while presenting complete normality to the man causing it. Tell me there's another option, he said. Charlotte thought. She thought the way she always thought when the problem was real and the time was short, not laterally, not creatively, but downward, into the structure of the situation, finding the load-bearing point, the single element that the whole construction depended on. The trigger, she said, whatever he's planning to release. We don't know the vehicle yet. We don't. If we can identify the vehicle before he releases it, we can potentially preempt it. A counter-disclosure, a regulatory filing, something that diffuses the information before it can cause the market impact he's counting on. That requires knowing what he has. Yes, she paused. I want to talk to him. Damien's eyes sharpened. Directly. Directly. One conversation. I'll tell him I've found the trades. She held Damien's gate. I won't tell him what we've sent to Sandra. I'll tell him I found it this morning, and I came to him first before Damien because I wanted to give him a chance to explain before it became something else. I'll make him think I'm uncertain, that I could be persuaded. He'll know you're running a play. Maybe. But he'll also know I have something real, and that if he disappears today without the trigger event, he walks away with $500,000 instead of 8 figures. He might decide the conversation is worth having. She paused. And if I can get him to tell me what the trigger vehicle is, you can preempt it. Sandra can preempt it. Damien looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that is not romantic and not professional, but something human and specific. The look of a man measuring how much he trusts the judgment of the person in front of him against how much the situation requires him to let her act on it. If he's dangerous, Damien said. He's not the kind of dangerous you mean. He's financial. He hurts through systems, not directly. She paused. But if you want someone in the hallway, that's reasonable. Marcus will be in the hallway, Damien said. It was not a suggestion. Charlotte nodded. She straightened her jacket. She took one breath, the kind that is not calming but clarifying, the kind that doesn't slow your heart but tells it to do its job. She walked to the 3rd floor. Nathaniel was at his desk reviewing documents when she knocked on the open door of the office he had been assigned. He looked up with the polished, professional expression that she now understood was his natural face. Not a mask exactly, but a surface, smooth and maintained, underneath which something else entirely moved. Charlotte. He set down his pen. Come in. She came in. She sat across from him without being invited to sit, which was a choice, and she watched him register the choice. I need to show you something, she said. I want your read on it before I take it to Damien. His expression didn't change. That itself was information. A man with nothing to hide would have been curious. He was careful. Of course, he said. She turned her laptop and showed him the investment portfolio trade pattern. She had removed the short position analysis. He didn't know she had found that yet, and she needed him not to know. She needed the conversation to stay inside what she could plausibly have found through her authorized access to the investment accounts. She watched his eyes move across the screen. She watched the speed of the movement. Too fast. The reading of someone who is confirming what they already know rather than discovering something new. Unusual, he said. Very, she said. Have you done a regression analysis against the broader portfolio strategy? I've done enough analysis to know the trade sequencing doesn't match any strategic framework I've seen in 3 years of managing this portfolio. She kept her voice level. Nathaniel, what is this? The pause was brief. Less than a second. A man deciding in real time which version of the next sentence served him best. It's a hedging strategy, he said. Defensive positioning in anticipation of market volatility. Against Meridian Group's own subsidiaries. Another pause. Slightly longer. Diversified exposure, he said. It's... Stop. Charlotte leaned forward, not aggressively, with the quiet authority of someone who is done accepting incomplete information. I've been in this organization for 3 years. I know what defensive positioning looks like, and I know what this looks like, and they are not the same thing. She held his gaze. I'm asking you directly, before I go to Damien with this, because I want to understand what I'm looking at. What is this? Nathaniel Brooks sat back in his chair. He looked at her the way he had looked at her at the lunch introduction. That quick, complete assessment, the measurement of variables. But this time the assessment ran longer, and underneath the composure, Charlotte could see for the first time the machinery, the calculation, the specific quality of intelligence that is entirely absent of conscience, that measures every option by its utility and nothing else. He smiled. It did not reach his eyes at all this time. You're good, he said. Charlotte said nothing. You're very good. You found it this morning? I found it this morning. And you came to me before Damien because I wanted to understand the situation before I made it larger than it needed to be. He studied her. Or because you wanted leverage. What would I need leverage for? You left this organization 9 days ago. You came back for a consultation. You found something significant. He tilted his head slightly. Some people would see that as an opportunity. Charlotte felt the shape of what he was offering. Not an explicit proposal, but the outline of one. The suggestion that the conversation could go a different direction if she was the kind of person who moved toward opportunity rather than integrity. She let the silence sit for 4 seconds, long enough for him to read it as consideration, long enough for her phone, sitting face down on the desk, to capture everything he had just said. Tell me about the trigger, she said. The smile disappeared. What trigger? He said. The information release. The market event you're planning to set off to actualize the short positions. She held his gaze without flinching. I know the structure. I know the short positions. I know the timing. I don't know the vehicle. Tell me what you're planning to release and when. The temperature in the room dropped. Nathaniel Brooks was very still. The composure was still there, but underneath it something had changed. The quality of the stillness was different now. The stillness of an animal that has been cornered, rather than the stillness of an animal that is hunting. You're recording this, he said. Tell me what you're planning to release, she said. He stood up. The movement was controlled, not panicked, but it was movement, and movement meant the conversation had reached its limit. Charlotte stood too, because she was not going to let him be taller than her in this moment. We're done, he said. You can talk to me now or to a federal prosecutor in 3 days. His eyes were flat. Get out of my office. The SEC is going to freeze the short positions at 3 p.m. today. She watched his face. The Delaware LLCs are already documented. The London account? We're working on it. She kept her voice even, because even was the only register that worked right now, that communicated that she had already won, and the only remaining question was what he planned to do about it. The conversation you just had with me is recorded. What you say next is up to you. Nathaniel Brooks looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. Charlotte's body moved before her mind did. A step back, her hand going to the edge of the desk. But what he pulled out was a phone. Just a phone. He looked at it for a moment with the expression of a man making a calculation. Then he pressed something on the screen, and Charlotte's phone, sitting face down on the desk between them, lit up with a notification she saw in her peripheral vision but did not look at, because she did not look away from him. You have until 3 p.m., he said. After that, everything I have on the Meridian Group goes public. Every financial irregularity I've documented, real or otherwise, goes to 3 financial news desks and 2 regulatory bodies simultaneously. His voice was flat and very controlled. You found the trades. You didn't find what I found in 6 days inside these systems. Charlotte felt her breath leave her. Because there's nothing to find, she said. That's not what matters, he said. What matters is what the story looks like. Matters is what the story looks like when it's told. And I'm very good at telling stories, Charlotte. That's what you should have understood from the beginning. He picked up his portfolio from the desk. 3 p.m., he said. unless someone makes me a different kind of offer. He walked past her and out the door, and she heard his footsteps in the corridor, steady and unhurried, and she stood in the empty office with her hand on the edge of his desk, and her phone lit up on the surface in front of her with a notification that she now looked at. It was a file transfer notification. He had airdropped something to her phone in the last 30 seconds. She opened it. It was a document, 43 pages, dated 6 days ago, titled in clean block letters that she read twice to make sure she was seeing them correctly. Meridian Group Financial Irregularities, Confidential Preliminary Assessment. She scrolled through it standing there in his empty office. She scrolled fast, the way you read something when you're looking for the shape of it rather than the content, when you need to understand what you're dealing with before you can decide what to do with it. It was fabricated. She was almost entirely certain it was fabricated. The irregularities it described were constructed from real data points, real transactions, real dates, but assembled into a narrative that did not reflect what had actually happened. The way a prosecutor's closing argument can take true facts and arrange them into a picture that is fundamentally false. Almost entirely certain was not the same as certain. And Nathaniel Brooks had just told her he was prepared to release this document to 3 financial news desks and 2 regulatory bodies in 2 hours and 51 minutes, unless someone made him a different kind of offer. Charlotte stood in his office with the 43-page document on her phone and the recording of his voice on the same device and 2 hours and 51 minutes on the clock. And she thought about Damien 1 floor above her, and Emily in Brooklyn with her fabric swatches and her whiteboard, and 3 years of Tuesday mornings and gas station sandwiches and the tally in her notes app that had counted 11 sleepless nights. She thought about all of it for approximately 6 seconds. Then she walked out of the office and down the corridor toward the stairwell, because she was not going to let Nathaniel Brooks reach the elevator first, and she was going to get to Damien's conference room before any of this had a chance to get worse. And she was going to do what she had always done when the situation was real and the time was short. She was going to find the load-bearing point, and she was going to move everything that rested on it before the whole structure came down. Her heart was going fast, faster than she would have liked, and she let it go fast because there was no time to manage it. And she hit the stairwell door and took the stairs at a pace that was close to running without quite being running, and above her the clock was moving toward 3 p.m. with the absolute indifference of time in a crisis, which is to say it moved exactly as fast as it always did, which was always faster than you needed it to. She hit the conference room door at a near run, and Damien was already standing, already reading her face, already moving toward her before she had the door fully open. "He knows," she said. "He's known since this morning, probably since yesterday." Marcus was there. Hartley was there by phone, his voice coming through the conference room speaker in the flat, careful tones of a man trying to keep pace with a situation that was moving faster than he'd planned for. Charlotte put her phone on the table and pulled up the 43-page document and turned the screen toward Damien. He read the title. His jaw set. "It's fabricated," Charlotte said. "I'm almost certain it's fabricated. He's taken real transactions and recontextualized them into a narrative that looks like systemic financial misconduct. Without the source documents to counter each point, the story holds long enough to trigger the market response he needs." "Almost certain," Damien said. "The Riverside land acquisition in 2021. He's described the environmental variance payment as a regulatory bribe. It wasn't. I have the documentation." She pointed at the screen. "The Harrington development financing. He's framing the bridge loan structure as money laundering through a shell vehicle. It wasn't. I was in the room when that deal was structured, and I know every document behind it." She looked up at him. "But I need to be in front of those documents right now. Not almost certain." "Where are the documents?" "Physical archive, 4th floor. Same room as the Riverside miscellaneous box." Damien looked at Marcus. Marcus was already moving. Charlotte turned back to the phone. "Hartley." "I'm here," Hartley said through the speaker. "The document he's prepared to release. I'm sending it to you now. I need you to go through it line by line against the Meridian Group's actual records and identify every point where the narrative diverges from documented reality. I need that analysis before 3 p.m. "Charlotte, it's 12:22. That gives me 2 hours and 38 minutes, I know." She was already forwarding this document. "You have the fastest paralegal in the city, or you don't. Which is it?" A beat. "Sending her the file now," Hartley said. Charlotte hung up. She looked at Damien. He was looking at her with the expression she had seen once before. In the conference room 4 days ago, when she had told him they had to let Nathaniel keep working, and Damien had asked if she could do this. The expression of a man who has placed his trust in a direction he can't fully control and is living with the weight of that placement in real time. "Where is he now?" Damien said. "He walked out of his office. He has the elevator. He could be anywhere in the building." She paused. "He's not running. Not yet. He said 3 p.m. He meant it. He's giving us, until 3 p.m. to make him a different kind of offer." "What offer?" "Money, probably. Let him walk with what he's already moved and an additional sum in exchange for the document and the short positions unwound." She held Damien's gaze. "He's been in this position before. He knows how these conversations go. He expects negotiation." "I don't negotiate with people who come into my house and try to burn it down." "I know that," Charlotte said, "but he doesn't know you know that yet. And that gap is 2 hours and 38 minutes wide, and we need to use every minute of it." Damien was quiet for 3 seconds, the controlled operational quiet of a man organizing priorities. "Find Sandra Voss," he said. "Already calling her." Well, Sandra picked up on the first ring. Charlotte walked her through the 43-page document in 7 minutes, hitting every major fabrication point she had identified in her scan, giving Sandra the counter-documentation reference for each one. Sandra listened without interrupting, which was not her usual pattern, which told Charlotte she understood the severity. "The SEC freeze application," Charlotte said. "Where are we?" Judge Mercer's clerk confirmed 3 p.m. availability. "I have the emergency application ready to file the moment I have her attention." Sandra's voice was flat and fast. "But Charlotte, listen to me. If he releases the document before 3 p.m. and it hits the news desks, the freeze application becomes secondary. The market impact could start moving within minutes of publication. We'd be fighting a narrative that's already live. Then we need to keep him from releasing it before 3. How? Charlotte thought. His short positions are held through the London account. If those positions are frozen or disrupted before he can trigger the market event, the payout disappears. No payout, no incentive to release the document, because the document's value to him is entirely as a mechanism for market manipulation. Without the financial payoff, it's just a liability. The London Exchange. I've been working a contact at the Financial Conduct Authority since this morning. They need formal documentation and a reciprocal request through the appropriate U.S. channel. That process normally takes 72 hours. We don't have 72 hours. I know, I'm working it informally. My contact is a person, not a process. But Charlotte, informal means faster, not guaranteed. Charlotte pressed the heel of her hand against the edge of the conference table. What do you need from me? The recording you made in his office. I need it authenticated and in my hands in the next 30 minutes. That's the strongest piece we have. His own voice describing the trigger event and the extortion offer. If I can get that to the FCA contact with the transaction documentation, it may be enough to move them before 3. I'll have Marcus courier it physically. 30 minutes. And Charlotte. Sandra paused, the way she only paused when what she was about to say was more than procedural. If this works, the case against him is solid. If it doesn't work, if he releases the document before we can freeze the positions or preempt the publication, you need to be prepared for a very difficult 48 hours. The fabricated narrative is credible enough to cause real damage before it can be refuted. I know, Charlotte said. Let's make sure it doesn't get that far. She hung up and turned to Damien and told him what she needed. Marcus had the recording authenticated and in a courier's hands in 22 minutes, which was 3 minutes faster than Charlotte had asked for, which was the thing about Marcus that she had always respected. He did not do minimums. At 1:15, Nathaniel Brooks walked into Damien's office. Not the conference room. The main office, with its glass walls and its view of 54th Street and the chair behind the desk that held a particular weight in the Blackwood organization, a weight that everyone who sat across from it could feel without being told to feel it. He walked in like a man who had been invited, which he hadn't been, because the kind of confidence he was projecting required the performance of entitlement, whether or not the entitlement was real. Damien was behind the desk. Charlotte was standing to the left of it, which placed her outside Nathaniel's direct eye line when he focused on Damien, which was where she needed to be for the next 45 minutes. Nathaniel sat down across from Damien without being asked. The two men looked at each other. Charlotte had seen Damian Blackwood in a great many high-stakes conversations. She had seen him manage alliance negotiations with men who wanted things from him. She had seen him sit across from attorneys and adversaries and city officials who needed to be convinced of things without being told directly what they were being convinced of. She had watched him operate in rooms where the power dynamics were complex and the language was layered and the surface meaning of every sentence bore only a passing relationship to what was actually being communicated. She had never seen him look the way he looked right now, which was like nothing at all. Not controlled, not tense, not strategically relaxed, just present, waiting, the way a room waits before something happens in it. "You have something that belongs to the organization," Damian said. "I have an analysis document," Nathaniel said, "based on my findings during a legitimate financial review." Your findings are fabricated. That's a strong word. It's the accurate word. Damian's voice was level. "Walk me through the Riverside variance payment." Nathaniel's eyes moved briefly to Charlotte. Back to Damian. "I don't think this needs to be a detailed, walk me through it." A pause. "The payment structure suggests the payment was for environmental compliance consulting services retained through a licensed firm whose engagement letter, invoices, and deliverable reports are on file and have been since 2021. Damian set a single sheet of paper on the desk and slid it across. "That's the summary. The full documentation is 47 pages. We can go through it if you'd like." Nathaniel looked at the paper. Something shifted in his expression. Not panic, not even surprise exactly. The adjustment of a man who has pushed on a wall and found it more solid than he expected. "The Harrington Bridge loan," Damian said. Another sheet of paper. Another slide across the desk. "The 2022 Meridian subsidiary restructuring." Another sheet. Charlotte watched Nathaniel's face as each sheet appeared. She watched the adjustment happening in real time, the recalibration of a man whose leverage is being systematically dismantled point by point, who is running the arithmetic of what remains available to him and finding the number smaller than he'd planned. Damian placed a fourth sheet on the desk. He didn't slide this one across. He left it in front of himself and looked at Nathaniel. "This is a transcript," Damian said, "of a conversation that took place this morning in your office, between you and my chief of operations." He let that title sit for a moment. Chief of operations. Not consultant, not temporary contractor. The title Charlotte had been offered and had not yet formally accepted, placed into the record now as a statement of fact rather than a negotiating position. "In that conversation, you described the structure of a market manipulation scheme, confirmed the existence of short positions held against Meridian Group's publicly traded subsidiaries, and made an explicit offer of extortion. You gave a specific deadline of 3 p.m. today." The room was very quiet. Nathaniel looked at the transcript. His face had done something that Charlotte had not seen it do in 10 days of watching him. It had gone still in a way that was not composure. Composure is a thing you maintain. This was a thing that had been removed. "That recording was made without my consent," he said. "New York is a one-party consent state," Charlotte said. It was the first thing she had said since he walked in. She said it without emphasis, without satisfaction, just the fact. "I was a party to the conversation. The recording is legal." Nathaniel looked at her. She looked back at him. In his eyes, she saw the arithmetic finishing. The final calculation of a man who has been in tight positions before and knows the difference between a tight position and a closed one. She watched him reach that knowledge, and she did not look away from the moment of his reaching it, because she had earned the right to see it, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. "The London account," he said. His voice was still controlled. She gave him credit for that. "You can't move on that without—" "The Financial Conduct Authority issued a temporary asset freeze on the account at 1:03 this afternoon," Charlotte said, "based on evidence of market manipulation submitted through an informal channel by an attorney with established FCA relationships." She checked her phone. "The formal reciprocal request through the SEC is being filed at 3 p.m., regardless of what happens in this room. The short positions are currently illiquid. They will remain illiquid until a federal court determines otherwise." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. "The document," he said finally. "The 43 pages." "You can release it," Charlotte said. "That option remains available to you. 3 news desks, 2 regulatory bodies. You described it accurately this morning." She set her own piece of paper on the desk. "That's a preliminary counterstatement prepared by Meridian Group's legal team, with source document references for every claim in your analysis. It's ready to be distributed to the same outlets the moment your document appears anywhere. The refutation will follow your release by approximately 11 minutes. She paused. You designed the document to create a window of market panic before the narrative could be challenged. The window is 11 minutes. I want you to think about whether 11 minutes of market movement on positions that are currently frozen and inaccessible to you is worth what happens next. Nathaniel looked at the counter-statement. He looked at the transcript. He looked at the 4 sheets of paper arranged on Damien's desk, like a hand being laid down in a card game. He looked at Charlotte. You were gone, he said. You had left. This was clean. I know, she said. Why did you come back? It was a genuine question. She heard the genuine in it. Not tactical, not a bid for sympathy, just a man who had run a very precise calculation that had accounted for every variable except one, and who needed to understand where the accounting had failed. Because I found something I couldn't put down, she said. That's the whole answer. Nathaniel looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at Damien. I want an attorney, he said. There's one in the building, Damien said. He's been waiting since this morning. Federal agents arrived at 4:40 p.m. Not dramatically. There were no drawn weapons, no shouted commands, no choreography of law enforcement arrival that the situation's severity might have warranted in a different kind of story. 2 agents in suits walked through the Meridian Group lobby, were met by Hartley and Sandra Voss, and were escorted to the 4th-floor conference room where Nathaniel Brooks had been sitting with his attorney for the past 2 hours, working through a conversation that had moved from denial to arithmetic to something quieter and more final. Charlotte was not in the room when they arrived. She was on the 7th floor, sitting at the table in the executive dining room with a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, looking at nothing in particular through the windows that faced north toward the park. The trees were turning. She hadn't noticed that during the past 10 days of sitting in this building watching a clock. October had been continuing without her involvement, the way October always did. Marcus found her there at 5:15. It's done, he said. He sat down across from her without being invited, which was the first time in 3 years she had seen him do that, and it registered as something meaningful about the shift in the room's gravity. He gave them everything, the Delaware LLCs, the London account, the contact inside Federal Financial Intelligence. Charlotte looked up. The federal contact. A compliance officer at the FinCEN regional office. He's been arrested as of 4 p.m. Had a relationship with Brooks going back 4 years, 3 previous operations. Marcus set his hands flat on the table. Sandra says the case is clean. Everything you documented, the recording, the FCA coordination, she called it the most organized evidence package she's received from a non-law enforcement source. Charlotte picked up the cold coffee, looked at it, put it down. The rival families, she said, the ones who were watching the situation. Word travels fast when a federal action happens at a midtown address. They've pulled back. Whatever they were positioning for, a destabilized Blackwood operation, a financial crisis. The window closed. He paused. Damien dealt with 2 phone calls this afternoon. That's all I know about that. She nodded. She didn't need to know more about that. The employees, she said, the legitimate businesses, the people who work in the logistics companies and the hotels and the development offices who had nothing to do with any of this. Business as usual tomorrow morning, Marcus said. The market closed today. Meridian Group's stock is down 1.2%. Noise. Nothing actionable. He held her gaze. You held the window. 11 minutes became 0 minutes. The document never released. Charlotte sat with that for a moment. 1.2%. The measure of how close it had come. The distance between the version of today that had happened and the version that almost did, reduced to a number that was almost too small to see. Go home, Marcus, she said. He stood. He paused at the end of the table. Charlotte. He said it with a weight that she recognized as the weight of something a man like Marcus Webb did not say often. Thank you. She looked at him. You too. He left. She sat with the cold coffee and the north-facing windows and the turning trees and the specific, enormous quietness of something that has ended. Damien found her at 6. The dining room was empty by then, the catering staff long gone, the overhead lights on their evening setting, dimmer, warmer. the light of a room transitioning from work to aftermath. He came in without knocking because there was no door to knock on, and he sat down not across from her but at the adjacent corner of the table, which was closer than across, and she noticed that without commenting on it. He put a glass of water in front of her. He had one for himself. He set them down with the careful deliberateness of a man who needed something to do with his hands. They sat in silence for a moment. "He's been charged," Damien said. "Securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit market manipulation, and extortion. Sandra says the federal contact's involvement adds a conspiracy charge that the prosecutor called career-defining." He paused. "Her word, not mine." "Good for her career," Charlotte said. "Good for ours." She looked at the water glass. "The alderman closing. Rescheduled for next Thursday." The title question resolved. The 2019 variance was clean. The zoning board records were found in exactly the place you said they'd be. He said it without irony, just the fact. "The Riverside site closes by end of month." "Good." "The logistics scheduling system needs to be rebuilt. The version that's been running for the past 10 days has 3 months of errors embedded in it. It'll take someone who understands the architecture." "I know." "Charlotte." She looked at him. In the evening light of the dining room, he looked tired in a way she had rarely seen. Not the operational tiredness of a man who needed sleep, but something deeper. The tiredness of a man who has spent 10 days inside a crisis, while also understanding something about himself that required understanding, and has arrived on the other side of both things simultaneously. "I want to say something," he said, "and I want you to let me finish before you say anything." She waited. "When you put that envelope on my desk," he said, "my first thought was logistics. Literally. My first thought was not, what is she feeling, or what does this cost her, or when did I stop seeing her as a person and start seeing her as a system I relied on? My first thought was logistics. Who do I call? How long does onboarding take? What breaks in the meantime?" He set down his water glass. "That's the thing I can't defend. Not the way I handled Tuesday. I handled it badly. I know that. But the reflex underneath it. The fact that my first instinct, when the person who had spent 3 years holding this organization together told me she was leaving, was to think about the organization." Charlotte was quiet. "I've spent 10 days watching you work," he said. "Not watching you in the way I watched you before, which was the way you watch something you depend on. More like background, like infrastructure, always there, always functional, taken for granted, the way you take granted things that don't fail. I mean, actually watching. What you did this week—" He stopped. He pressed his thumbnail against the edge of the table, a small gesture of pressure, something real finding its way through the discipline. "I knew you were capable. I didn't know what capable meant. I had the category without the content. Damien, I'm not finished." She closed her mouth. "What I'm trying to say, and doing it badly because I don't have practice saying things like this, is that I understand now what the resignation was. Not emotionally compromised, not the wedding, not the week, not a temporary thing you needed distance from. It was 3 years of Tuesday. And I put you in that position because I was the kind of person who could look at someone giving everything they had and think, good, useful, the system is working, without ever once asking what the system was costing the person running it." He looked at her directly. "That's the thing I'm sorry for, not Tuesday, the 3 years of Tuesday." The dining room held the quiet of evening traffic coming through the glass. A long way below, the city moved through at 6 o'clock in the way it always moved. Without pause, without acknowledgement, indifferent and ongoing and enormous. Charlotte looked at the man across the corner of the table from her. She had spent 3 years reading him, learning the grammar of his silences and the syntax of his decisions, and she understood now that the thing she had most resented, the invisibility, the assumption that she would continue to be present because she had always been present, had been less cruelty than a specific kind of blindness. The blindness of a man who had learned to manage everything except the people who made the managing possible. She did not forgive it all in that moment. That would have been too clean, too fast, and she was done with clean and fast. But she heard it. She let herself hear it without the defense she had carried for 10 days, the necessary armor of a woman operating in hostile conditions. And underneath the armor she found something that surprised her. Not anger, not grief, but something quieter and more complicated. The feeling of being seen, imperfectly and late, and in a room where the coffee had gone cold, by someone who was trying harder than she had expected him to be capable of. "I know," "No," she said. "That's all you're going to give me." "For now," she said. "Yes." He looked at her for a moment. Something in his expression shifted. Not disappointment, not resignation. Something that might have been, in a different man, relief. The relief of someone who has said the true thing and been received honestly rather than easily. "The Chief of Operations position," he said. "I heard you use that title this afternoon, in front of Nathaniel." "I know." That was presumptuous. "Yes," he said. It was. She looked at the water glass he had put in front of her. She picked it up and drank from it and set it back down and thought about Emily's apartment and the fabric swatches and 8 hours of sleep and the tally in her notes app and the 6 drafts with the deleted apologies. She thought about what she had found when she stopped managing the empire and started managing herself. That the competence didn't leave, that the capability was still there, that what she had lost was not her skill, but her sense of it as something that belonged to her rather than something she gave away. She thought about the 43-page document and the 11-minute window and the cold clarity of sitting across from Nathaniel Brooks in his office and holding a lie so completely that it left no seam. She had not liked becoming that. She had done it anyway, and she had done it well. And the fact that she could hold both those things simultaneously, the discomfort and the effectiveness, was itself a kind of information about who she was. "I'll take the position," she said. "Under conditions." Damien straightened slightly. "Name them." "Formal authority over all legitimate Meridian Group operations, with my own direct legal counsel independent of the family's existing legal team. Full access to all financial systems, all vendor relationships, all contract structures. No exceptions and no areas I'm told I don't need to see. A compensation structure that reflects the actual value of the role, not the historical rate of the assistant position." She paused. "And a formal separation of the Meridian Group entities from the family's other operations. Not informal, not an understanding, documented, legal, structural. I will run the legitimate businesses with full integrity, and I will not be in a position where what I don't know about the other side becomes my liability." Damien considered each condition in order, the way he considered everything, seriously, without performance. "The separation is overdue," he said. "I've known that for 2 years. I've been avoiding the structural work because it requires admitting the current structure has problems." He held her gaze. "I'll start the process next week. It'll take 3 to 4 months to complete properly. Then I start formally in 4 months. Until then, I'll consult on the transition. I'd want you in the building before 4 months." "I know what you'd want," she said. 4 months." He held her gaze for another moment. Then he nodded. Not the nod of a man accepting terms he resented. The nod of a man who has been negotiated with fairly and knows it. 4 months, he said. Charlotte set down the water glass. Outside the 7th-floor windows, the park was dissolving into the particular blue of an October evening, the light going amber and then gray, and then the quiet dark of a city that never goes fully dark. Charlotte had looked at this view many times over 3 years without seeing it, the way you stop seeing things that are always there. She saw it now. She called Emily from the lobby at 6:40. Emily answered on the second ring, the way Emily always answered, with the immediate, unguarded presence of someone who had never learned to manage her availability because she had never needed to. "Are you all right?" Emily said. "Yes," Charlotte said, and meant it in a way she had not meant the word in a long time. "Are you home?" "Tom's making dinner. There's enough." Charlotte stood in the Blackwood Building's lobby with the evening street behind her and the marble floor cool under her feet and the weight of the day distributed throughout her body the way physical work distributes, in the shoulders, in the jaw, in the backs of the knees. "I'll be there in 40 minutes, she said. "Take the express," Emily said. "The local is a disaster. I know which train to take." "You didn't last week. You took the local and it took you an hour." "I was distracted last week." "Are you still distracted?" Charlotte pushed through the revolving door and stepped onto the sidewalk. The city hit her the way it always hit her when she emerged from a controlled interior into the uncontrolled exterior. With all of it at once, the noise and the cold, and the crowd moving past with the absolute self-involvement of a city in its evening, each person inside their own urgent particular world. "No," Charlotte said. "I'm not distracted." She walked to the subway. She took the express. The formal restructuring of the Meridian Group took 4 months and 11 days. Sandra Voss's office referred Charlotte to a corporate attorney named Patricia Hale, who had spent 20 years separating legitimate and illegitimate business structures for clients who had, at some earlier point in their careers, allowed the two to become uncomfortably adjacent. Patricia Hale was 61, meticulous, and had the specific lack of sentimentality that came from having seen most things twice. She and Charlotte worked through the structure methodically, entity by entity, account by account, contractual relationship by contractual relationship, building the wall that should have been built years ago between the part of the empire that could withstand daylight and the part that couldn't. Damien was present for every significant structural decision, not performatively, not in the way of a man trying to demonstrate changed behavior, but genuinely present, asking questions, pushing back when he disagreed, accepting correction when the correction was warranted. He was not, Charlotte noted, a different person. He was the same person operating with information he had not previously possessed, which was that the way he ran things had costs he had not been accounting for, and that the unaccounted costs had nearly destroyed what he was trying to build. That distinction mattered to her. She was not interested in a man who had become someone else in the aftermath of a crisis. She was interested in what the crisis had taught the man who had already been there. Nathaniel Brooks was indicted on 7 federal counts 4 months after his arrest. His attorney entered a plea arrangement that reduced the counts to 4 in exchange for full cooperation with the investigation into the FinCEN compliance officer. The compliance officer, whose name was Gerald Hatch, and who had spent 16 years inside federal financial intelligence building relationships, he then rented to people like Nathaniel Brooks, was indicted separately on 12 counts and did not cooperate with anything. Charlotte read about both indictments in the newspaper. She read the articles once, set the newspaper aside, and went back to the restructuring documents she had been working through that morning. There was nothing she needed from those articles that she did not already have. The 3 companies from Nathaniel's professional history, the companies that had quietly failed in his wake, the people who had worked in them, the shareholders who had lost money in the aftermath of his careful 14-month departures, those were harder to set aside. She thought about them sometimes, not with guilt, because she had not put him in those companies, but with the particular weight of understanding that she had been the one who noticed in the case of the Blackwood organization, and that nobody had noticed in the previous cases, and that noticing had required her to be in a specific position at a specific time, which had required her to have left and come back, which had required a sister with an engagement ring and a kitchen table, and the willingness to say you're disappearing to someone who needed to hear it. The thread was long, and it ran through things she had not chosen. She thought about that too. Emily's wedding was in March. Charlotte was the maid of honor. She gave a toast that she had written herself. 3 drafts, no apologies in any of them. She talked about what it meant to be seen by someone who loves you enough to say the true thing. She talked about the specific courage of choosing a future over a position. She talked about her sister with the unguarded directness of someone who had recently learned the cost of guardedness and had decided to stop paying it. Tom cried during the toast. Emily had expected this and handed him a handkerchief before Charlotte had reached the second paragraph, and the room laughed at the timing and the warmth of it, and Charlotte stood at the front of a room full of people who were happy, genuinely happy, and felt the warmth of the moment settle into her without the usual background frequency of the organization's unfinished business running underneath everything. For the first time in longer than she could pinpoint, there was no background frequency. There was just the room, just her sister's face, bright with everything she had chosen, just the toast and the warmth and the moment finishing itself. Damien came to the wedding. He had been invited because Charlotte had invited him, which had surprised Emily until Charlotte explained it, and then surprised her again when the explanation made sense. He arrived in a dark suit, alone, with the particular social precision of a man who knew how to be in a room without requiring anything from it. He shook Tom's hand with genuine warmth, said something to Emily that made her laugh, and found Charlotte near the bar between the ceremony and the reception. "You look different," he said. "I'm wearing different clothes." "That's not what I mean." She looked at him. He was right, and she knew he was right, and she also knew what he meant more specifically, that she looked like herself, which was not the same as how she had looked in the Blackwood building for 3 years, where she had looked like the job. "How are the accounts payable thresholds holding?" she said. You reviewed them yourself last week. I want to hear you say it. They're holding, he said. Patricia Hale's team completed the third entity separation yesterday. 2 more to go. I know. I have a meeting with Patricia on Monday. They stood for a moment with the wedding reception moving around them. The music starting up, people finding their tables, the particular warm chaos of a room full of people who have dressed up and eaten well and are prepared to be happy for the evening. Charlotte, Damien said. She looked at him. He was not. She had learned over 4 months of working alongside him differently than she had worked alongside him before. A man who said things he didn't mean. He was not particularly fluent in the language of feeling, not in the way that some people are. He did not reach for it easily or naturally. But when he reached for it, it was real, and she had learned to hear the reaching. You built something that held, he said. Not just this month. 3 years of it, and then you built it better. He paused. I want you to know I understand what that cost, and what it was worth. She looked at him for a moment. I know, she said. You've gotten better at showing it. Slowly. Slowly is fine, she said. Slowly means it's real. Something moved in his expression, quick and genuine, there and then receded into the composure that was his natural register. But she had seen it, and it was enough. Emily appeared at Charlotte's elbow with the specific urgency of a bride who has just remembered something logistical. The photographer needs us for the family pictures before the light changes. Charlotte, you need to come right now. Tom's already over there and... Go, Damien said. Charlotte handed him her glass and went with her sister. She did not look back. She had learned over the past 4 months that she did not need to look back to know where she stood. That was the thing about building a foundation that was genuinely solid rather than just functional. You could walk forward on it without checking behind you to see if it was still there. It was still there. She walked into the warm light at the other end of the room where her sister was waiting, and the photographer was arranging people and Tom was laughing at something someone had said, and she took her place in the picture with the ease of a woman who knew exactly where she belonged, which was something she had not known for a very long time and intended, from this point forward, never to forget. The picture was taken. The evening continued. Outside the windows of the venue, March moved through the city the way March always does in New York, with the specific indifference of weather turning, cold still present, but not insisting. The first suggestions of something warmer working their way up through the pavement, and the bare branches, and the long gray stretch of a winter that was not quite finished but had lost its conviction. The city did not notice. It never noticed. It was simply itself, enormous and ongoing, full of people in the middle of their particular urgent lives, each one carrying something heavy, each one looking for the moment when the weight shifts, and the thing you have been holding so long you forgot it wasn't part of you finally settles into its right proportion. Not gone, not forgotten, but in its place, where you can carry it without it carrying you. Charlotte Whitmore danced at her sister's wedding until her feet hurt. She did not